Children of I Want to Talk to Your Manager parents, what has been your most embarrassing experience? Story 1. Not me, but my sister-in-law. Her stepdad and mom took the family out to eat at a Red Lobster. They get there and it's super busy. So the stepdad walks up to the host and says, "Yes, we have a reservation." The problem is, Red Lobster, or at least that one, doesn't take reservations. The host explains this and says that it's going to be a 20-minute wait for seating. Her stepdad flipped out and started screaming that he had called 3 hours beforehand and made a reservation. The host politely told him that this was not possible as they don't take reservations again. He continues to scream at the guy and says that he wants to talk to a manager. So the manager comes out and she tells him the same thing. They don't take reservations, so it's not possible that he made one. He continues to cause a scene and people started leaving just to get away from this toxic guy. Finally, the manager says, "Fine, we'll put you ahead of everyone else that has been patiently waiting their turn." He says, "Thank you," and they get seated. Once they get to the table and the waitress walks away, he slyly winks and says to my brother and the rest of the family, "That is how you get things done. I wasn't going to wait 20 minutes. My brother refused to eat or order for fear of getting food that had been spit on. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. One time, my granddad got a sausage roll at a football match during halftime. When he got back to his seat, he found it was overdone. The pastry was quite burnt. The man was irate. He didn't take it back straight away as the second half was about to start, but he spent much of the second half angrily lamenting his savory snack letdown. So he takes it home, calls the customer service number on the back. I assume he had a few choice words for the poor soul on the other end, but I wasn't present for this. And keeps the remainder of the sausage roll in the freezer for the next couple of weeks. Skip ahead to the next match day. My grandfather tells me we're heading out early so he can have his sausage roll replaced. The customer service line told him to go to kiosk 3 at the front of the ground next to the ticket office when we arrive. However, the shutters are down at the food place. The old man looks around growling and turning red in the face. At this point, I'm trying to convince him the ticket office was a completely different department to the catering concession, but my granddad was having none of it. The lady working the ticket window continually attempted in vain to convince him the same. They sell match tickets, not snacks. This just got him angrier and angrier. Across comes a colleague behind the glass. Now there's just 2 people to rage at. Then a head steward comes to attempt to defuse the situation and my granddad begins to wave the burnt sausage roll in this man's face. I was actually surprised he didn't whack him with it. Eventually, after an hour or so, the shutters come up on the food concession. Fella at the counter goes, "You must be Mr." and calmly resolves the situation, dispatching a freshly baked sausage roll with the steady hands of a surgeon. My granddad is completely satisfied with the result of his hour of insolent rage. As we're walking away, he turns to me and says, "That's how you get these things sorted." Yes, that's how you get what things sorted exactly? Maybe spending an hour on something worth $3? Yeah, that's a good use of time for sure. You sure taught your grandson well. Story 3. I grew up in a smaller town right on the cusps of its big growth boom. We knew our town had finally made it when we got an Olive Garden. We used to eat there 2 to 3 times a month. My mom and I would always split the entree and my dad would get his own. We knew the rule: if you're splitting an entree and you get more than one of the family-style bowls of salad, then you'll get charged an extra $4 for the extra person. Which is fair. 2 entrees come with 2 unlimited salads. Well, one day my dad decides he wants more salad. Only he wants the additional salad, but the waitress said that if she refills the bowl, that we will be charged the extra $4. Well, lo and behold, my parents threw the biggest tantrum because only he wanted the additional salad. They demanded to speak to a manager, and the manager explained the rule, which we knew, but offered to comp the extra salad just to get my parents to stop yelling. And they did. When the bill came, my manager comped my dad's entree and the additional salad fee. Well, my mom got up, interrupted the manager while he was talking to other guests, and threw the check in his face and asked, "What's this?" She was furious that he had comped my dad's meal. He ate the meal, therefore we would like to pay for it. She wouldn't stop raising her voice until she was allowed to pay for the meal, but not the salad. The manager was confused, but obliged. When they brought the change, the manager slipped a few free appetizer coupons. My mom ripped them up and threw them on the ground as she left. Safe to say I didn't eat out with them for at least a month, and I still refuse to go to Olive Garden with them. Story 4. I was around 6 or 7 and we had been driving all day through Florida to see my grandma. Because of various travel hangups, we ended up getting to the hotel at 3 a.m. to discover that there were no pillows in our room. My dad took myself and my mom down there and asked the concierge what he was going to do about it. The man said he didn't know what was to be done because all of the extra pillows were for guests. He actually asked, "What if someone needs them?" This is why my dad blew up, pointing out that exact situation was happening in that moment and started going off on the guy. First time I ever heard my dad curse. This doesn't sound like a "let me speak to your manager" parent. It just seems like a guy who's tired from travel and was presented with no pillows in the hotel room. This is just incompetence by the hotel, I think. Story 5. Not long ago, my mom asked to treat my wife and I to lunch at Outback Steakhouse. We get there and order. My mom orders iced tea with extra lemon. Tea shows up with 1 lemon, usually no big deal, right? Just ask for more. Well, instead of doing that, my mom turns to the waiter and says, "What? No extra lemon? You fail as a waiter. No brownie points for you." The dude just sits there for a moment and then says, rather flatly, "I'll be right back with more lemon." I turn to my mom and I'm like, "Yeah, that's how you get your food spat in. You've just sent the message that this will be a crappy tipping table and he's totally going to focus elsewhere." She argues that, well, it should have inspired him to work harder from his end. His odds of making money are now higher at some other table. It's just how people work. Well, she goes to the bathroom and cries. She comes back and makes some super complicated order. I texted my wife, who was sitting right next to me, and say, "This dude is going to butcher that order on purpose." Food comes out. Ours is correct. Hers is all screwed up, basically a completely wrong order. She asks for it to be fixed, a little more subdued this time. It comes out technically correct, but obviously carelessly prepared/cooked. I chuckle inside. Here's the insane part. After all this, she turns to us and says, "I was right about that waiter. He sucks at his job." It's like, no dude, your behavior made him not give a crap about you. After being a total jerk and paying the price, she walked away feeling validated and haughty. I slipped in a nice tip with a "sorry for my mom" note. Story 6. Not exactly the situation, but my dad was great with those customers. We had a small family business selling and installing fireplaces, for context. He, on more than one occasion, when getting the customer call or come in after the installers had finished up and left the job site to complain about one of the men being rude or something, would get this look of grave concern on his face. He would then go into a backstory, saying things like, "Oh, no, not again," or do the open mouth, closed teeth inhale thing and just like tisk, tisk, tisk. And then start on with some nonsense about having told the guy before that it was his last warning and go on about how he was going to have to let them go. The blood draining from people's faces or the dead silence on the other end of the phone line was magical, followed by the customer frantically explaining that, oh, maybe it wasn't that bad, or blaming themselves. He was never going to actually fire anyone, but he'd find out real quick who was just complaining for fun. Many of those customers have no qualms about getting the employee in trouble, but in general, folks don't want to jeopardize other people's livelihoods. Story 7. I went out to breakfast with my mom, and our waitress straight up disappeared. We sat for a good half hour after having ordered nothing but eggs. It was an off time, so the diner was pretty quiet. It was as if our waitress had just evaporated. Naturally, my mom asked someone if we could speak to the manager. She stops by, my mom lets her know what's happened, and asks if she can check on our waitress, our food, or whatever. 10 minutes later, the manager shows up with our food, and the waitress in tow. She puts our food down, then proceeded to rip into the waitress. This poor woman broke down in tears, apologizing profusely. We felt awful, didn't even bother finishing our food. Once the manager was out of sight, my mom found the waitress, gave her a hug and a larger tip than usual. It was rough, leaving us both sufficiently embarrassed. Story 8. I think every memory I have of my mom is her yelling at a customer service employee either on the phone or in their face. I always felt bad for the employees. I remember at least one instance in which I felt really embarrassed. I did an online program that was geared towards new drivers. It was all about driving safety and took forever to do. At the end of the course, the young driver had the opportunity to get lower insurance rates, so I had to call a customer service representative and confirm some personal information, as well as answer some things from the course in order to get the rates. My mom kept insisting that I put the phone on speaker. Every time I did, the rep would tell me to take it off speaker. My mom would then try to follow me around the house trying to listen in, and the rep could hear her and said she needed to stop. My mom got mad at the rep and I ended up not getting the lower rates on my insurance because the rep was fed up. I personally find it a little weird that the phone wasn't allowed to be on speaker. I guess the explanation could be that they didn't want the person cheating on the questions they asked them, but it's suspicious when we're talking about anything insurance related and not allowed to tell anyone about it. That sounds like a scam. It's probably not, but it just sounds really weird. Story 9. This is my favorite example of my mom being an absolute wacko. So we're from New York and I met her in LA where she was vacationing for a few days. There's a restaurant we'd been to before and really wanted to visit again. I guess you could say it was a hot spot. This is lunchtime with no reservation. We arrive at the restaurant and there are a bunch of open tables. It's early, probably before noon. My mom asks for a table and they say, "Oh, we're so sorry, but if you don't have a reservation, we unfortunately do not have any tables for you. If you'd like, you can leave your phone number and we can call you if we have any cancellations." My mom starts huffing and puffing, pointing at all the tables, which are of course reserved for 12 to 12:30 reservations but are currently empty. She's making a whole scene and just storms out of the restaurant. I try to explain to her the way that restaurants work, that there are empty tables because other people are going to be coming in later with reservations. She is storming down the block just ranting, "No, you don't get it. I've worked in restaurants my whole life. This is what they do. It's LA. It's like a nightclub. They don't like the way we look. This is ridiculous." While she's ranting, the hostess comes running down the block. They had a cancellation and they could seat us immediately. I was humiliated. I didn't even want to eat there anymore. Long story short, I never take my mom to any restaurant I like. Story 10. Okay, so we're going to a theme park in the capital of the country. I must have been around 19, which makes my one sister 16 and the youngest around 9. My dad had been planning this for a year and we were psyched to go. After you go into this place, you see a huge lake and on each side there are several shops. A restaurant there, a souvenir shop there, and also there's a Build-A-Bear shop. This shop is not part of the park itself, but it does have an entrance from the park. Anyway, my dad didn't have custody of my sister at the time and only saw her very sporadically. This was by his own choice, since his anxiety meant that he couldn't care for her properly. She lived with a foster family. This was one of maybe 3 times a year he actually got to take her somewhere, so this trip was a big deal. He told her she could have one thing from the park, whatever she wanted, and he would pay for it. And being a 9-year-old girl, she wanted a Build-A-Bear. My dad was unfamiliar with the concept of Build-A-Bear, so he didn't know that the price of the bear isn't the total price. On top of it comes the clothes, the shoes, etc. So the shop person takes my sister through the whole thing. You know, stuffing, putting the heart in, etc., and rings up the total. My dad just lost it, like red in the head, screaming at this poor girl in the shop. I felt so embarrassed. Firstly, the girl didn't make the prices. Secondly, this was the trip of the year. It was all 4 of us for the first time in forever. And thirdly, you just don't yell at people like that. I get that he was angry since he didn't know the process and felt cheated. And also, he felt backed into a corner since he had promised my sister that she could have anything. But you don't do that, ever. Luckily, the rest of the trip went by without a hitch, and my youngest sister doesn't remember this happening. She has 2 Build-A-Bears now, and she named each of them after her sisters. Story 11. Not my parents, but once I was out to dinner with my brother-in-law and his family. Our meals all came out at almost random times instead of all together. My brother-in-law demanded to talk to the manager because it was unacceptable that the food came out at different times. And he said something about how he hopes they don't expect us to pay for the meal. He gave a big speech about how we came out so we could eat together and he knows this is unacceptable because he used to be a waiter, etc. I was mortified because I didn't think it was that big of a deal. This has got to be some weird form of generational trauma where waiters start ragging on other waiters for things. You would think that being in the service industry would make you kinder to people, and I feel like it often does, but sometimes it just goes the other direction. Story 12. My mom constantly does this, but one time really sticks out. We went to a local Mexican restaurant, and as we were paying for the food, she tried to use a coupon. The cashier said they wouldn't accept the coupon, and my mother was furious. She demanded that the manager come out and accept the coupon. She caused a massive scene in the restaurant, and it lasted at least 5 minutes. As the cashier was getting the manager, I decided to look at the coupon. It was for a totally different Mexican restaurant in the area, and my mom wasn't wearing her glasses. The cashier and manager both came back, my mom apologized, and they ended up accepting the coupon. Story 13. It was at a TGI Fridays in Katy, Texas. This waiter was amazing. He was working 8 tables that I could count and was managing all of them flawlessly. Drinks never got below 1/3 full at any table. He was always attentive and prompt, friendly, just a textbook example of the perfect waiter. He impressed my dad so much that my dad asked if he could speak to a manager. Of course, the waiter immediately asks if anything is wrong, since that's the only time someone asks. My dad tells him no, it's to make sure that management knows what excellent service he's providing. The waiter thanks us and says that he'll get a manager over as quickly as he can. We wait for about 10 minutes before this middle-aged greaseball of a manager saunters over and starts asking my dad how the waiter screwed up. My dad is not the most patient of people, and we were all kind of in a hurry to get home, so the 10-minute wait was rubbing him wrong. But when the manager immediately acted like the guy was a screw-up, my dad lost it. He told the manager that the waiter had done everything perfectly, and that's why he tipped the guy $15 on a $35 bill. He also went on to say that the manager needed to be more respectful of his staff, and gave the guy a chewing out for presuming that the employee had screwed up. Before that moment, I thought that my sister and I were the only ones he would scream at when he was upset. It was somewhat embarrassing to see my dad yell at this guy, but he did it for a good reason. Story 14. I remember when I was like 6, my whole family, all 6 of us, went to the dollar store. I don't remember much, but I remember we were in the car about to go home and my mom was looking at the receipt, and she noticed that the cashier gave them $1 less in change than they were supposed to. My mom was furious and made us all go back inside. She started yelling at the poor teenage girl cashier about how they're bad people and this is wrong, etc., etc. Then the girl said something like, "Okay, geez," then rolled her eyes while giving back the correct change. This made my mom flip. She started screaming at the top of her lungs about how they're evil and how she needs to fix her attitude, etc. Another one was when we recently had a fire in our house. A bunch of ash and fire extinguisher stuff got all over the house and we got a cleaning company to clean up the house. It was like 2 dudes and 2 girls. I don't know what exactly triggered my mom, but apparently she didn't like the way they were cleaning. She started yelling at them and lecturing them that they should know how to clean, especially the girls, because they're female. She then showed them how to do it while continuing to yell at them. A lot of the bad outbursts were the same way she threatened us when she got mad. She's gotten a lot calmer since then, though. The whole flipping out for $1 seems strangely common with these stories about Karens. Like, how hard is it as a fully grown adult to just react accordingly to what happened? Like, sure, be like, they gave me $1 less. Sure, whatever, go in and maybe complain a little bit. Just be like, hey, you gave me $1 less, I'd like it. And they'll probably be like, oh yeah, sure, my bad, and just give it to you. Instead, it becomes a whole thing. So unnecessary. But I guess that's what makes them Karens.